The distress signal came through the void like a dying whisper, crackling across the emergency frequencies that every spacefaring species monitored. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human vessel Retribution, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the source of the transmission. The signal originated from the Kepler 442 system, a region of space that had been marked as uninhabited on every star chart the Terran Federation possessed. Analysis. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Chen commanded, her voice cutting through the bridge's tense atmosphere. The crew of the Retribution had been on patrol duty for 3 months, hunting pirates along the Outer Rim territories. This distress call was the most interesting thing they'd encountered in weeks. Rodriguez's fingers danced across his console, pulling up spectral analysis and signal strength readings. Captain, it's definitely not human origin. The frequency patterns match no known Terran communication protocols. Computer estimates it's from the Velthari species, based on linguistic markers embedded in the transmission. Chen nodded grimly. The Velthari were one of the newer species humanity had encountered during their expansion into the galaxy. They were peaceful traders, known for their elaborate crystal cities and advanced medical technology. Their home system lay nearly 200 light-years from human space, making this distress call puzzling in its location. Can we translate the message? Chen asked, moving closer to the communication station. Already working on it, ma'am. The universal translator is having some difficulty with the dialect, but I'm getting fragments. References to attack, colony ships, and death from above. There's also mention of something called the Skorath Dominion. The name sent a chill through the bridge crew. The Skorath Dominion was whispered about in the darker corners of galactic civilization, described as a brutal empire that enslaved weaker species and strip-mined entire worlds. Most civilized governments dismissed them as myth, but frontier traders told different stories. They spoke of ghost ships appearing without warning, of colonies vanishing overnight, leaving only scorched earth behind. Sir, Rodriguez continued, his face pale as more of the translation came through. They're not asking for rescue. They're warning everyone to stay away. The Velthari colony ships were fleeing their home system when they encountered the Skorath. They've been hunted across 3 star systems. The survivors are holed up on a moon in the Kepler system, but they don't think they can hold out much longer. Chen felt her jaw tighten. The Terran Federation had strict protocols about interference in conflicts between alien species. Humanity was still relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 70 years ago. The Federation preferred diplomacy and trade agreements over military intervention, but Chen had read the classified reports from the Outer Rim. She knew what the Skorath did to their victims. Ma'am, came another voice from across the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, her executive officer, approached with a data pad in hand. I've been reviewing our mission parameters. Technically, we're authorized to investigate any threats to Federation shipping lanes. The Kepler system sits along the Centauri trade route. Chen almost smiled at Webb's careful wording. He'd been with her long enough to know how she felt about standing by while innocents suffered. The Retribution wasn't just any Federation vessel. It was part of the Terran Defense Force's Rapid Response Division, crews specifically chosen for their ability to make quick decisions in hostile territory. How long since the last transmission? She asked. 14 hours, Captain. The signal's getting weaker. Chen stared at the star charts, calculating distances and jump times. The Retribution could reach the Kepler system in 18 hours if they pushed their engines hard, but what they'd find there was anyone's guess. The Skorath were reportedly powerful, with ships that could challenge anything in the Federation fleet. Captain, Rodriguez called out urgently. I'm detecting another signal. This one's different. It's not Velthari. The bridge fell silent as Rodriguez worked to isolate the new transmission. When it came through the speakers, the difference was immediately apparent. Where the Velthari signal had been desperate and frightened, this new voice was cold, mechanical, and utterly without emotion. Attention, inferior species. The territories you have fled to are now claimed by the Skorath Dominion. You have 6 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. Submit to processing and your deaths will be swift. Resist and we will ensure your suffering lasts for cycles. Your choice is irrelevant. The Skorath are eternal. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Chen felt something cold settle in her stomach. Processing. She'd heard that term in the classified briefings about the Skorath. It meant systematic torture, followed by conversion of survivors into drone workers. The Scorath didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them, turning entire populations into extensions of their collective will. "Captain, what are your orders?" Webb asked quietly. Chen looked around at her crew. These were hardened military personnel, men and women who'd signed up to protect human interests in a dangerous galaxy. But she could see in their faces the same thing she felt in her heart. Sometimes protecting human interest meant standing up to monsters, even when those monsters weren't threatening humanity directly. "Plot a course for the Kepler system," she ordered. "Maximum burn, and send a coded message to Fleet Command informing them of our destination and the nature of the threat." "Are we going to assist the Velthari survivors?" Webb asked. Chen's expression hardened. "No, Commander. We're going to do what humans do best when faced with bullies and tyrants." She turned to face the main screen, where the star field stretched endlessly ahead of them. "We're going to war." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as the crew prepared for combat operations. Navigation plotted their jump coordinates while engineering began preparations for the extended high-speed burn that would get them to Kepler in record time. In the weapons bay, armaments officers began the process of loading the ship's missile tubes and charging the plasma cannons. As the Retribution turned toward its destination and engaged its faster-than-light engines, none of the crew could have imagined they were about to write a new chapter in galactic history. The Scorath had spent millennia terrorizing weaker species, confident in their superiority and the fear they inspired. They had never encountered humanity, never faced a species that responded to distress calls not with rescue ships but with warships. They were about to learn why humans were called Deathworlders, and why the galaxy's predators had learned to fear Earth's children. The Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, like a predator emerging from tall grass. Captain Chen stood rigid on the bridge, her eyes scanning the tactical displays that showed the system's layout. What she saw made her blood run cold. The Velthari hadn't lied about their situation. 3 massive Scorath dreadnoughts hung in orbit around Kepler 442c, their dark hulls bristling with weapon arrays that could crack a planet's crust. Each ship was nearly twice the size of the Retribution, built with the brutal efficiency that marked all Scorath technology. But it wasn't the dreadnoughts that made Chen's jaw clench with rage. It was the debris field. Scattered across the inner system were the twisted remains of what had once been Velthari colony ships. Hundreds of them, judging by the wreckage. These hadn't been warships, Chen realized with growing fury. They'd been civilian vessels, packed with families and refugees fleeing their dying homeworld. The Scorath had hunted them down like animals. "Sensor sweep complete, Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm reading approximately 50,000 Scorath ground troops on the moon's surface. They've established some kind of processing facility. Energy readings suggest it's active." Chen didn't need him to explain what that meant. The screaming she could hear in the background of the Velthari distress signals told her everything she needed to know about the Scorath's processing methods. "Any sign of Velthari survivors?" she asked. "Minimal life signs detected in a series of underground caverns on the moon's northern hemisphere. Maybe 2,000 individuals, possibly fewer. They appear to be heavily shielded, but the Scorath have deployed mining equipment. They're digging them out." Commander Webb stepped up beside Chen, studying the tactical display. "Captain, this is suicide. 3 dreadnoughts against 1 heavy cruiser? Even if we had the element of surprise, the math doesn't work." Chen nodded slowly. Webb was right, of course. By every measure of military doctrine, this was an impossible battle. The Scorath ships outgunned them, outnumbered them, and held the tactical advantage of prepared positions. A smart captain would retreat, call for reinforcements, and return with a proper fleet. But Chen wasn't feeling particularly smart at the moment. She was feeling angry. "What's the status on our surprise package?" she asked, turning to her weapons officer. Lieutenant Sarah Kim grinned fiercely. "The experimental antimatter torpedoes are loaded and ready, Captain. Engineering says we've got enough power for a full salvo, but only one." The antimatter torpedoes were a recent development from Terran Weapons Labs, designed specifically for penetrating the heavy shields that protected capital ships. Each torpedo carried a small antimatter warhead that could theoretically punch through anything short of a planetary defense grid. The Retribution was one of only 3 ships in the fleet equipped to carry them, and this mission would mark their first combat deployment. "Range to primary target?" Chen asked. 8 million kilometers in closing. The lead dreadnought appears to be their command vessel. It's maintaining position directly over the processing facility. Chen studied the formation, her tactical mind working through possibilities. The Skorath were overconfident. Their ship spread in a loose patrol pattern that suggested they weren't expecting any real opposition. It was the kind of arrogance that came from centuries of facing enemies who either fled or died quickly. "All hands, this is the captain," Chen announced over the ship's communication system. "In approximately 10 minutes, we will be engaging a superior enemy force to protect innocent civilians. I won't lie to you about our chances, but I want you to remember something. Every species in this galaxy has heard stories about the Skorath. Today, the Skorath are going to hear stories about us." The bridge crew exchanged glances, and Chen could see the mixture of fear and determination in their eyes. These were professional soldiers, but they were also human. They understood what they were about to attempt, and they understood why it mattered. "Incoming transmission," Rodriguez announced suddenly. "It's from the lead Skorath vessel. Put it through." The main screen flickered, and suddenly Chen was looking at her first living Skorath. The creature was humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways that made her skin crawl. Its skin was a mottled gray-green, stretched too tight over angular bones. Its eyes were completely black, devoid of any emotion she could recognize. When it spoke, its voice was the same mechanical monotone they'd heard in the earlier transmission. "Unknown vessel, you will halt your approach and prepare for inspection. Your technology will be assessed for usefulness. Your crew will be processed according to Skorath efficiency protocols." Chen stepped forward, her expression calm despite the rage burning in her chest. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation ship Retribution. You are hereby ordered to cease hostile operations against Velthari civilians and withdraw from this system immediately." The Skorath's expression didn't change. If anything, it seemed to find her words amusing. "Terran Federation. This designation is unknown to Skorath records. You appear to be a previously unencountered species. Your defiance is irrelevant. Submit now, and your processing will be expedited." "Let me make something clear," Chen replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The only thing that's going to be processed today is your ships into scrap metal. Consider this your only warning." The transmission ended abruptly, and almost immediately the tactical displays began flashing red warnings. All 3 Skorath dreadnoughts were changing course, converging on the Retribution's position. Energy readings spiked as they powered up their weapon systems. "They're moving to attack formation," Webb reported. "Estimated time to weapons range, 4 minutes." Chen nodded and moved to her command chair. "All hands, battle stations. Shields to maximum, weapons charged and ready. Helm, plot an attack course for the command ship. We're going right down their throats." "Captain," Kim called from her weapons station, "I'm detecting some kind of energy field around the lead dreadnought. It's not standard shielding. The computer can't identify it." Chen felt a chill of uncertainty. The Skorath were known for their advanced technology, but this was something new. Still, there was no time for hesitation now. The 3 enemy ships were accelerating rapidly, their formation designed to catch the Retribution in a crossfire that would tear her apart in seconds. "All ahead full," Chen ordered. "Target the command ship's primary weapon array. Fire when ready." The Retribution leaped forward like a hunting cat, her engines burning at maximum power as she closed the distance to the enemy formation. The first exchange of fire lit up space with violent beauty. Plasma bolts and particle beams crossing the void in lethal patterns. The battle for Kepler 442 had begun, and across the galaxy, other species would soon learn that humanity had a very different approach to answering distress calls. Where others sent aid ships and negotiators, humans sent warships and fury. The Skorath were about to discover why the other species of the galaxy whispered about the Deathworlders from Sol, and why those whispers were always spoken with a mixture of respect and fear. The first salvo from the Skorath dreadnoughts hit the Retribution like the fist of an angry god. The ship bucked and rolled under the impact, her shields flaring brilliant white as they absorbed energies that could vaporize a small asteroid. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles across the bridge, and the lights flickered ominously. "Shields down to 60%. Lieutenant Rodriguez shouted over the alarms. "Hull breaches on decks 7 and 12. Captain Chen gripped her command chair as another barrage hammered their defenses. The Skorath weren't just powerful. They were frighteningly accurate. Each shot seemed to find the exact point where it would do the most damage, as if their targeting computers could predict where the retribution would be before she even changed course. "Return fire," Chen ordered. "All batteries target their lead ship." The retribution's plasma cannons opened up in response, sending streams of superheated particles across the void. The shot struck the Skorath command vessel's shields and simply disappeared, absorbed by that strange energy field Lieutenant Kim had detected earlier. "Our weapons aren't penetrating, Captain," Kim reported, frustration clear in her voice. "Whatever that field is, it's completely negating our plasma fire." Chen cursed under her breath. The Skorath had some kind of defensive technology that human science couldn't match, but as she watched the enemy ships maneuvering to surround her vessel, something clicked in her mind. The field was protecting them from energy weapons, but what about kinetic projectiles? "Kim, load railgun batteries with depleted uranium slugs," she ordered. "Let's see how well that fancy shield works against old-fashioned mass drivers." The Retribution's railguns were primarily used for anti-fighter defense, firing small projectiles at tremendous velocity. They weren't designed to penetrate capital ship armor, but Chen was betting the Skorath's energy field wouldn't stop solid matter. The railguns fired in rapid sequence, sending streams of metal slugs toward the command ship at nearly 10% the speed of light. The results were immediate and gratifying. The projectiles punched right through the energy field as if it wasn't there, sparking against the Skorath vessel's armor plating. "Direct hits," Kim announced triumphantly. "Minor damage to their hull, but we're getting through." Chen felt a grim smile cross her face. The Skorath technology might be advanced, but it had limitations. Like most species that achieved technological superiority, they'd become overspecialized. Their shields could stop any energy weapon ever developed, but they'd apparently never encountered anyone primitive enough to still use kinetic weapons. "All railguns, continuous fire," Chen commanded. "Target their weapon arrays and engine clusters." The Retribution continued her desperate charge, her railguns hammering the command ship, while return fire from all three dreadnoughts battered her shields. It was a race now, a test of whether human engineering could survive long enough to exploit the gap in Skorath defenses. "Captain," Webb called from his station, "I'm reading massive energy buildup from the second dreadnought. Whatever they're charging, it's drawing power from their main reactor." Chen followed his gaze to the tactical display, where one of the trailing Skorath ships was indeed showing unusual power signatures. As she watched, a section of its hull split open like a blooming flower, revealing some kind of massive weapon array. "Evasive maneuvers," she shouted, but it was too late. The weapon fired and space itself seemed to twist and buckle around the beam. Where it touched the Retribution's shields, reality appeared to bend, creating visual distortions that hurt to look at directly. The ship's defensive barriers didn't absorb the attack or deflect it. They simply ceased to exist, vanishing as if they had never been there at all. "Shields completely down," Rodriguez screamed. "That thing just deleted our deflectors." Chen felt ice in her veins. This was beyond advanced technology. This was something that violated the fundamental laws of physics as humanity understood them. The Skorath weren't just using energy weapons and kinetic shields. They had weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level. The second shot from the reality-bending weapon missed by mere meters, close enough for the Retribution sensors to detect the effect on local spacetime. Where the beam passed, stars in the background briefly flickered out of existence before snapping back into reality. "Captain," Kim said, her voice tight with desperate inspiration, "the antimatter torpedoes. If that weapon works by manipulating quantum fields, maybe antimatter will disrupt it." Chen didn't hesitate. "Fire all tubes at the ship with the special weapon. Maximum spread pattern." 6 antimatter torpedoes streaked toward the second dreadnought, their warheads containing enough destructive force to level a city. The Skorath ship's energy shields flared as the weapons approached, but antimatter had properties that even their advanced technology couldn't fully contain. The explosions that followed lit up the entire system like a newborn star. Antimatter annihilation released pure energy in amounts that staggered comprehension, and the Skorath vessel simply vanished in the expanding sphere of destruction. When the light finally faded, nothing remained but superheated plasma and twisted metal. A cheer went up across the Retribution's bridge, but Chen wasn't celebrating. They'd destroyed one enemy ship, but at the cost of their only antimatter weapons. 2 dreadnoughts remained, and her ship was now defenseless against their energy attacks. "Incoming transmission from the Skorath command ship," Rodriguez announced. Chen straightened in her chair. Put it through. The same gray-skinned alien appeared on screen, but now its black eyes showed something Chen hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. Your species possesses weapons that should not exist, the Skorath commander said, its mechanical voice carrying an edge of something that might have been confusion. Our records indicate no civilization has successfully deployed antimatter weaponry in ship-to-ship combat. How have you achieved this? Chen smiled coldly. We're humans. We specialize in doing things that shouldn't be possible. This designation human continues to be unknown to our archives. You will submit to immediate analysis. Your technology will be reverse-engineered for Skorath use. I've got a better idea, Chen replied. How about you tell your ground forces to step away from those Velthari civilians? And maybe I won't introduce you to some more impossible human technology. The alien's expression remained unchanged. But there was a pause before it responded. You have destroyed one vessel with your primitive antimatter weapons. You now have no such weapons remaining. Your resistance is futile. Chen's smile widened. You're absolutely right. We don't have any more antimatter torpedoes. She paused for effect. But who said anything about antimatter being our most dangerous weapon? The transmission ended and Chen turned to her crew. The Retribution was damaged, outgunned, and facing impossible odds. But she could see in her officers' faces the same thing she felt burning in her own heart. The Skorath thought they understood warfare. They were about to learn that humans had been perfecting the art of violence since they first picked up rocks and clubs in African caves millions of years ago. The real battle was just beginning, and the galaxy was about to witness why humans were feared even among the stars. Captain Chen's words hung in the air of the bridge like a challenge to the universe itself. Around her, the crew of the Retribution waited in tense silence, their damaged ship drifting through space while two massive Skorath dreadnoughts closed in for the kill. The enemy vessels moved with predatory confidence, their commanders clearly believing that the fight was essentially over. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Engineering. This is the captain, Chen said into her comm unit. I need Chief Ramirez on the bridge immediately. Tell him to bring the Genesis device specifications. Commander Webb shot her a sharp look. Captain, the Genesis device is still experimental. We don't even know if it works, and the power requirements alone could overload our reactor. Chen nodded grimly. Then we'd better hope Chief Ramirez is as good as his reputation suggests. Chief Engineer Miguel Ramirez arrived on the bridge 3 minutes later, carrying a sealed case that bore multiple warning labels in 17 different languages. He was a small, wiry man with graying hair, and the kind of intense eyes that came from spending decades making impossible things work under impossible conditions. Captain, he said without preamble, please tell me you're not thinking of using the Genesis device in combat. The theoretical models suggest a 90% chance of catastrophic failure. What about the other 10%? Chen asked. Ramirez paused, then grinned like a man who'd spent his career turning theory into reality. The other 10% would make every Skorath ship in this system very sorry they ever heard of humans. The Genesis device was one of the Terran Federation's most classified projects, a weapons system that existed at the intersection of theoretical physics and engineering insanity. Based on principles that most scientists insisted were impossible, it was designed to create artificial singularities on demand. The project had been mothballed after the prototype destroyed an entire testing facility and turned a small moon into what was now known as the Prometheus crater. How long do you need to make it operational? Chen asked. 20 minutes to jury-rig the power coupling, maybe 30 if we want it to not kill us all, Ramirez replied. But Captain, even if it works perfectly, we'll only get one shot. After that, our reactor will need complete rebuilding, assuming the ship survives the power drain. Chen looked at the tactical display where the Skorath ships had closed to within 2 million kilometers. At their current rate of approach, they'd be in optimal firing position in less than 15 minutes. The math was brutal, but it was the only chance they had. Do it, she ordered. The next 25 minutes were the longest of Chen's military career. The Retribution played a deadly game of cat and mouse with her pursuers, using debris from the destroyed Velthari ships as cover, while Ramirez and his team worked frantically in the bowels of the ship. The Skorath seemed content to toy with their prey, firing occasional shots that forced evasive maneuvers but didn't press for a quick kill. It was a mistake that would cost them dearly. Genesis device is online, Ramirez announced over the comm. Power coupling is holding, but barely. I'm reading stress fractures in the primary containment field. Time to catastrophic failure? Chen asked. Unknown. Could be 5 minutes, could be 5 seconds. This thing was never meant to be used. Chen nodded and turned to her navigation officer. Plot a course directly between the 2 remaining Skorath ships. Full burn. Maximum acceleration. Captain, Webb said urgently. That course will put us within point-blank range of both dreadnoughts. They'll tear us apart. That's the idea, Chen replied. The Genesis device has a limited effective range. If we want to catch both ships in the singularity field, we need to get close. The Retribution changed course abruptly, her engines burning at maximum power as she accelerated toward the gap between the enemy vessels. The Skorath responded immediately, both ships opening fire with everything they had. Energy beams and projectile weapons filled the space around the human cruiser, turning the void into a deadly light show. Hull breaches on multiple decks, Rodriguez reported as the ship shook under the bombardment. We're losing atmosphere. On levels 5 through 8, structural integrity at 30% and falling, added Webb. The ship won't hold together much longer. Chen gripped her command chair as another massive impact sent her sliding across the bridge. Sparks showered from damaged consoles and the lights flickered ominously. The Retribution was dying around them, but she was still flying, still fighting. Distance to optimal firing position, Chen asked. 30 seconds at current velocity, the navigation officer replied, his voice strained as he fought to keep the ship on course through the enemy fire. Chen opened a channel to the entire ship. All hands prepare for Genesis device activation. Secure all loose objects and brace for gravitational anomalies. This is going to get rough. The Skorath seemed to realize something was wrong. Both enemy ships began to change course, trying to avoid whatever trap the humans were setting. But they were too close now, committed to their attack formation. The Retribution had positioned herself perfectly, right between the 2 dreadnoughts at the optimal distance for maximum effect. Genesis device charged and ready, Ramirez announced. Reactor output at 130% of rated capacity. Captain, we need to fire now or the containment field will collapse. Chen took a deep breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine not just the fate of her ship and crew, but the survival of thousands of Velthari civilians trapped on the moon below. Fire the Genesis device. What happened next defied human language to describe. The Genesis device didn't fire in any conventional sense. Instead, it reached out and grabbed a tiny piece of spacetime, twisted it into an impossible knot, and squeezed until reality itself broke. A black sphere the size of a baseball appeared directly between the 2 Skorath ships, and suddenly both massive vessels began to stretch like taffy. The artificial singularity lasted only 3 seconds before it collapsed. But those 3 seconds rewrote the local laws of physics. The Skorath dreadnoughts, each massing millions of tons, were pulled inexorably toward the gravity well. Their advanced shields and energy fields meant nothing against the fundamental force that held the universe together. Metal screamed as the ships were compressed and twisted, their hulls folding in ways that matter wasn't meant to fold. The crews inside experienced death in forms that had no names, crushed by gravitational forces that turned atoms themselves into exotic particles. When the singularity finally collapsed, taking the 2 dreadnoughts with it, the Retribution found herself alone in the system. Around her, the debris field that had once been the most feared warships in Skorath space drifted in slowly expanding clouds of superheated plasma and twisted metal. Status report, Chen said quietly, her voice hoarse from the strain of the battle. All Skorath vessels destroyed, Rodriguez reported, his tone mixing disbelief with triumph. The orbital bombardment of the moon has ceased. I'm detecting increased life signs from the Velthari survivors. Chen nodded and sank back into her command chair, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished. The Retribution was barely holding together. Her reactor was on the verge of complete shutdown and they were stranded hundreds of light years from the nearest human base. But they'd won. Against impossible odds, using weapons that shouldn't exist, they'd defeated an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. More importantly, they'd sent a message that would spread throughout known space faster than any transmission. The Skorath Dominion, the unstoppable force that had crushed 1,000 civilizations, had been defeated by a single human ship. And if one human ship could do this, what could 100 do? What could 1,000 do? The galaxy was about to find out what happened when you threatened something that humans were protecting. The answer, as species across the stars would soon learn, was swift and terrible beyond imagining. The silence that followed the destruction of the Skorath fleet was deafening. Captain Chen sat in her command chair, staring at the tactical display that showed nothing but debris where moments before two massive dreadnoughts had dominated the battlefield. The Retribution drifted through space, her hull scarred and bleeding atmosphere, but alive. Impossibly, incredibly alive. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm receiving multiple transmissions from the Velthari survivors on the moon. They're asking if the orbital bombardment has really stopped." Chen straightened in her chair, pushing aside the exhaustion and adrenaline crash that threatened to overwhelm her. The battle was over, but their mission wasn't complete. There were still thousands of terrified civilians trapped in underground caverns, hiding from an enemy that no longer existed. "Open a channel to the survivors," she ordered. "Full translation protocols." The main screen flickered, and suddenly Chen found herself looking at a Velthari civilian, a being that looked almost ethereally beautiful despite the obvious signs of fear and deprivation. The Velthari were tall and slender, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of their underground refuge. Their large, dark eyes held an intelligence that spoke of an ancient and peaceful civilization. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation vessel Retribution," Chen said. Her voice steadied despite everything they'd just been through. "The Skorath forces have been neutralized. You are safe." The Velthari's eyes widened with something that might have been disbelief. "Terran Federation? We do not know this designation. How is it possible that one ship defeated 3 Skorath dreadnoughts?" Chen almost smiled at the question. It was the same one she'd been asking herself since the Genesis device had torn reality apart and taken their enemies with it. "Let's just say that humans have a different approach to impossible situations." "We are in your debt, Captain Chen," the Velthari continued. "I am Elder Theron, speaking for the survivors of New Velthari. We number 2,371 souls, including 412 children. We had given up hope." The weight of that number settled on Chen's shoulders like a physical burden. Over 2,000 lives that would have been lost if the Retribution hadn't answered their distress call. 2,000 beings who would have been subjected to the Skorath's horrific processing methods if humans had followed standard Federation protocol and waited for reinforcements. "Elder Theron," Chen said, "we need to discuss evacuation procedures. Our ship is damaged, but we should be able to transport your people to safety." Commander Webb appeared at her shoulder, his expression troubled. "Captain, I need to speak with you privately." Chen excused herself from the communication and moved to the back of the bridge with her executive officer. Webb's face was grim, and she could see the worry lines that had deepened over the course of the battle. "What's our real status, Marcus?" she asked quietly. "Bad, Sarah, really bad. The Genesis device fried half our systems when it discharged. Life support is failing. The reactor is held together by prayer and engineering tape, and our faster-than-light drive is completely offline." "We're not going anywhere anytime soon." Chen felt her heart sink. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 72 hours before life support fails completely. Less if we try to take on additional passengers." The cruel irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. They'd saved the Velthari from the Skorath, only to potentially doom them all to a slow death in the void. But Chen had spent 20 years in the Terran Defense Force, and she'd learned that problems existed to be solved, not to be despaired over. "What about the Skorath ground installation?" she asked. "Any usable technology down there?" Webb consulted his datapad. "Our scans show extensive facilities on the moon's surface. The Skorath had been preparing for a long-term occupation. There might be power generators, life support systems, maybe even communication equipment." Chen nodded, her tactical mind already working through possibilities. "Get me Chief Ramirez." The chief engineer arrived within minutes, still wearing the grease-stained coveralls that marked him as a man who solved problems with his hands rather than theories. His expression was weary but alert, the look of someone who'd just performed a miracle and was ready to perform another if necessary. "Chief, what would it take to establish a basic colony on that moon using Skorath technology?" Chen asked. Ramirez scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, assuming their power systems are compatible with our life support needs, and assuming we can figure out how to operate their equipment without blowing ourselves up, it's theoretically possible. The Skorath were thorough. They'd have brought everything needed for long-term operations. Time frame? Give me 48 hours and a team of volunteers who aren't afraid of experimental alien technology, Ramirez said with a grin that didn't quite hide his exhaustion. I can't promise it'll be comfortable, but I can probably keep everyone breathing. Chen felt the first stirring of hope since the battle had ended. Do it. Take whoever you need. She returned to the communication with Elder Theron, who had been waiting patiently despite the obvious desperation of his people's situation. The Velthari's composure in the face of near-certain death spoke to a cultural strength that Chen found deeply impressive. Elder Theron, I have a proposition, Chen said. Our ship is too damaged to evacuate your people immediately, but we believe we can establish a temporary colony using the Skorath facilities on the moon's surface. It won't be permanent, but it will keep everyone alive until rescue arrives. The Velthari elder's expression showed a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Captain Chen, we are a peaceful people. We know nothing of war or the technologies of conquest. How can we operate Skorath equipment? You won't have to, Chen assured him. My crew will handle the technical aspects. All we need from your people is patience and cooperation. Over the next several hours, the Retribution became a hive of desperate activity. Engineering teams shuttled back and forth to the moon's surface, working to understand and repurpose Skorath technology for peaceful purposes. It was dangerous work, made more difficult by the fact that Skorath equipment was designed with casual cruelty in mind. Every system seemed to include unnecessary elements of pain or intimidation, but humans, Chen reflected, were remarkably good at turning weapons of war into tools of survival. Within 36 hours, Chief Ramirez had managed to convert a Skorath interrogation facility into a functioning habitat. The processing chambers that had been used to torture prisoners were transformed into living quarters, their fearsome appearance softened by human ingenuity and Velthari artistic sensibility. The evacuation of the survivors from their underground refuge was a careful process. Many of the Velthari had been trapped in the caves for weeks, subsisting on emergency rations and recycled water. They emerged blinking in the artificial light of the converted facility, their ethereal beauty made more poignant by the obvious toll their ordeal had taken. But what struck Chen most was their dignity. Despite everything they'd endured, the loss of their homeworld, the death of most of their people, the weeks of terror hiding from the Skorath, they maintained a grace that spoke to something fundamental about their nature. They thanked each human crew member personally, their large eyes filled with a gratitude that needed no translation. Elder Theron approached Chen as she supervised the final stages of the evacuation. The tall Velthari moved with the careful dignity of someone who had led his people through unimaginable hardship and somehow kept them together. Captain Chen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of formal ceremony, the Velthari remnant wishes to make a formal declaration. From this day forward, humanity will be counted among our most honored friends. Your species has shown us that there is still courage and compassion in this dark galaxy. Chen felt heat rise in her cheeks. Elder Theron, we were just doing our job. The Velthari's expression grew thoughtful. Your job, as you call it, was to patrol human space and protect human interests. Yet when you heard our distress call, you came to fight an enemy you had never encountered to save people you had never met. This is not duty, Captain. This is something far rarer. As Chen looked around at the bustling activity of the converted facility, at her crew working alongside Velthari civilians to build something hopeful from the ruins of conquest, she began to understand what Elder Theron meant. The galaxy was full of species that followed rules and protocols, that calculated costs and benefits before acting. But sometimes the most important things couldn't be calculated. Sometimes the only thing that mattered was the simple recognition that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. The rescue ships would come eventually. Federation reinforcements were already en route, along with Velthari vessels from other surviving colonies. But the real rescue had already taken place, performed by a damaged human ship and a crew that refused to accept that impossible odds meant inevitable defeat. The Skorath had learned too late that humans didn't calculate the mathematics of survival. They simply survived and helped others do the same. 3 days after the battle, the first rescue ships arrived in the Kepler 442 system. Captain Chen stood in the observation deck of the converted Skorath facility, watching as sleek Velthari vessels dropped out of hyperspace alongside the angular bulk of Federation heavy cruisers. The sight should have filled her with relief, but instead she felt a strange sense of melancholy. The temporary colony they'd built on the moon had become something special. Humans and Velthari had worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques that bridged the gap between their vastly different cultures. The Skorath processing facility, once a place of horror and death, had been transformed into something that resembled hope. "Captain," Commander Webb said, approaching with a data pad in his hands, "the fleet commander wants to debrief you personally. Admiral Harrison is aboard the Endeavour, and he's requesting an immediate meeting." Chen nodded absently, still watching the rescue fleet take up positions around the moon. "Any word on our repairs?" "The engineering teams say it'll be at least 2 months before the Retribution is spaceworthy again." "The Genesis device did more damage than we initially thought. We're lucky the reactor didn't go critical." Chen turned from the observation window, finally focusing on the responsibilities that awaited her. Debriefings, after-action reports, probably a formal inquiry into her decision to engage a superior enemy force without authorization. The bureaucratic aftermath of victory was often more challenging than the battle itself. The shuttle ride to the Endeavour gave her time to organize her thoughts. Admiral Harrison was known throughout the fleet as a by-the-book commander who valued protocol above all else. Chen suspected she was about to face some difficult questions about her decision-making process. The Admiral's cabin aboard the Endeavour was spartanly furnished, reflecting Harrison's no-nonsense approach to military service. The man himself was in his 60s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of making hard decisions. He gestured for Chen to sit but remained standing himself. "Captain Chen," he began without preamble, "your actions in this system have created quite a stir back at fleet headquarters. Engaging 3 enemy dreadnoughts with a single heavy cruiser goes against every tactical doctrine we've developed." Chen straightened in her chair. "Sir, the situation demanded immediate action. The Velthari civilians were facing imminent extermination." "I understand the humanitarian considerations," Harrison replied, "but you also used an experimental weapon system that was specifically classified for research purposes only. The Genesis device was never approved for combat deployment." "With respect, Admiral, the Genesis device was the only thing that gave us a chance against Skorath technology. Their energy shields were completely immune to our standard weapons." Harrison moved to the viewport, staring out at the debris field that marked the remains of the enemy fleet. "Captain, do you understand what you've done? For the first time in recorded galactic history, someone has decisively defeated a Skorath battle group. Do you comprehend the implications?" Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "Sir, the Skorath Dominion has existed for over 2,000 years, Harrison continued. They've conquered or enslaved hundreds of species. Most civilizations consider them a force of nature, like storms or earthquakes, something to be endured rather than fought." The Admiral turned back to face her, and Chen was surprised to see something that looked almost like awe in his expression. "Your battle has been broadcast across every major communication network in known space," he said. "The recordings from the Velthari survivors show everything. The galaxy has watched a single human ship destroy an entire Skorath fleet using weapons that shouldn't exist and tactics that defied military logic." Chen felt her mouth go dry. "What's the reaction been?" "Mixed," Harrison admitted. "Some species are terrified that humans possess such destructive capabilities. Others are asking if we'd be willing to help them deal with their own Skorath problems. And the Skorath themselves," he paused, consulting a datapad, "they've declared humanity a priority threat. Every human ship and colony is now considered a legitimate military target." The weight of that revelation settled on Chen like a physical burden. Her decision to answer the Velthari distress call had potentially doomed her own species to a war with the most feared military force in the galaxy. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I take full responsibility for the consequences of my actions. If court-martial proceedings are necessary, being court-martial?" Harrison interrupted, and to Chen's amazement, he actually smiled. "Captain, the Federation Council has awarded you the Star of Valor for your actions here. They're also fast-tracking the Genesis device program and authorizing full combat deployment across the fleet." Chen stared at him in confusion. "Sir, I don't understand. You said the Skorath have declared war on humanity." "They have," Harrison confirmed, "and that's the best thing that could have happened to this galaxy." The Admiral moved to his desk and activated a holographic display showing star charts of known space. Red markers indicated Skorath-controlled territory. a vast swath of systems that cut across multiple spiral arms. Captain, the Skorath have been the galaxy's nightmare for 2 millennia. Every species lives in fear of them, but no one has ever successfully fought back. Until now. He highlighted the Kepler system, where a single blue marker showed the location of Chen's victory. You've proven they can be beaten. More importantly, you've shown the galaxy that humans will fight for people who aren't even our allies. Chen began to understand what Harrison was getting at. You think other species will join us against the Skorath? I think other species have been waiting for someone brave enough to throw the first punch, Harrison replied. The Velthari have already offered to share their medical technology and industrial capacity. The Andorian Trade Federation has pledged economic support. Even the Crystalline Collective, who haven't spoken to outsiders in 50 years, have sent diplomatic overtures. The holographic display shifted, showing new markers appearing across the galaxy. Blue for confirmed allies, yellow for species expressing interest in cooperation, green for those offering material support. The pattern was clear. Chen's victory had sparked something that went far beyond a single battle. Admiral, Chen said slowly, are you saying I've started a galactic war? Harrison's smile widened. Captain, I'm saying you've started a galactic revolution. The Skorath have spent centuries teaching the galaxy to fear them. Now you've taught the galaxy something more important. They can be defeated. Chen looked at the star chart, at the growing network of alliances and partnerships that had emerged from her decision to answer a simple distress call. The mathematics of the situation were staggering. If even half the species expressing interest actually committed to the fight, the combined fleet would dwarf anything the Skorath could deploy. What are my orders, Admiral? She asked. Finish your repairs and report to Earth for reassignment, Harrison said. The Retribution is being recommissioned as the flagship of the new Allied fleet. Congratulations, Captain. You're about to become the most famous warrior in galactic history. As Chen left the Admiral's cabin, her mind reeled with the implications of everything she'd learned. She'd answered a distress call and somehow changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The Skorath had built their empire on fear and the assumption that no one would dare to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been about humanity, and about the rest of the galaxy they'd terrorized for so long. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the newly refitted Retribution, but the ship that emerged from the shipyards bore little resemblance to the vessel that had limped away from Kepler 442. The human cruiser had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a true fusion of technologies from dozens of allied species. Velthari crystal matrices enhanced the ship's sensors to impossible levels of sensitivity. Andorian quantum computers processed tactical data faster than any previous system. Crystalline collective energy conduits channeled power with zero loss efficiency. And at the heart of it all, human engineering had found ways to make technologies that should have been incompatible work together in perfect harmony. Fleet status report, Chen requested, settling into her command chair. The bridge itself had been redesigned to accommodate officers from multiple species, with environmental controls that could adjust atmosphere and gravity for different physiologies. Commander Webb, now sporting the insignia of a full commander, consulted his expanded tactical displays. 1,237 vessels at full combat readiness, Captain. Representatives from 43 allied species. The largest fleet in recorded galactic history. Chen nodded, trying to process numbers that still seemed impossible. The allied fleet stretched across 3 star systems, a vast armada of ships representing every major civilization that had ever suffered under Skorath oppression. They'd come from across the galaxy, bringing their most advanced weapons and their deepest hatred of the Dominion. Any word from the advanced scouts? Chen asked. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now wearing the uniform of a lieutenant commander, turned from his communication station. Long-range reconnaissance confirms the intelligence reports, Captain. The Skorath have massed their entire fleet in the Terminus system. Every dreadnought, every battlecruiser, every ship they possess. They're making their final stand. Chen studied the tactical projection that appeared above the bridge. The Terminus system was a perfect location for a decisive battle, with multiple jump points that would allow the Allied fleet to approach from several directions simultaneously. But it was also a trap, with gravity wells and asteroid fields that could channel attacking forces into killing zones. Estimated enemy strength? She asked. Over 3,000 ships, Webb replied grimly. including their new Devastator-class dreadnoughts. Our intelligence suggests they've been building them specifically to counter our Genesis device technology. Chen felt a familiar chill. The Skorath weren't primitive savages who relied solely on fear and superior numbers. They were intelligent, adaptive enemies who learned from their defeats. The easy victory at Kepler 442 would not be repeated here. Incoming transmission from the Allied Council, Rodriguez announced. Fleet Admiral Takara of the Andorian Federation requesting immediate conference. Chen nodded. The Allied Council was the unprecedented governing body that had emerged from the anti-Skorath coalition. Takara herself was a brilliant strategist whose people had suffered under Skorath raids for generations. If anyone could coordinate a fleet of this size and complexity, it was her. The main screen flickered, revealing the insectoid features of Admiral Takara alongside representatives from a dozen other species. The sight still amazed Chen. 6 months ago, many of these civilizations had never spoken to each other. Now they were united in common cause against their ancient enemy. Captain Chen, Takara began, her translated voice carrying the weight of command. Our scouts report that the Skorath fleet is moving to defensive positions. They intend to make us come to them. Chen leaned forward in her chair. What's our tactical assessment? Difficult, admitted General Vorak of the Crystalline Collective, his crystalline form refracting the bridge lights in complex patterns. The Skorath have chosen their position well. Any direct assault would cost us thousands of ships. However, added Elder Theron, representing the Velthari survivors, our combined intelligence networks have identified a weakness in their formation. The Skorath are deploying their forces to counter traditional fleet tactics. They may not be prepared for unconventional approaches. Chen smiled grimly. Unconventional approaches were what humans did best. What do you have in mind, Elder? The Genesis device proved that human weapons can affect Skorath technology in unexpected ways, Theron continued. We believe a coordinated assault using multiple Genesis-equipped vessels might create a cascading failure in their defensive grid. Takara's mandibles clicked, and what Chen had learned was the Andorian equivalent of agreement. The simulation runs support this theory. If we can create even a temporary gap in their defenses, the main fleet can exploit the opening. Chen considered the proposal. It was dangerous, requiring precise coordination between ships using experimental weapons technology. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, but it was also the kind of bold, impossible plan that had brought them this far. How many Genesis-equipped vessels do we have? She asked. 17, Webb replied, including the Retribution. Chen nodded slowly. 17 ships against over 3,000. The mathematics were terrifying, but mathematics had never stopped humans before. Admiral Takara, Chen said, I volunteer the Retribution to lead the Genesis assault. We have the most experience with the technology. Captain, Takara replied, the survival probability for the lead assault ships is less than 30%. Chen looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. Humans and aliens working side by side in perfect cooperation. These weren't just military personnel anymore. They were representatives of everything the Allied fleet stood for. The idea that different species could work together, that cooperation was stronger than domination, that the galaxy could be something better than a hunting ground for predators. Admiral, Chen said quietly, 6 months ago a single human ship faced impossible odds to save people we'd never met. Today 43 species have joined together to end a nightmare that's haunted the galaxy for 2,000 years. I think 30% odds are pretty good considering. The conference call ended with final preparations being made for the assault. The Allied fleet would jump to the Terminus system in 18 hours, and the fate of galactic civilization would be decided in the battle that followed. Chen walked to the observation deck after the briefing, looking out at the vast armada that surrounded the Retribution. Ships from dozens of worlds carrying the hopes and dreams of trillions of beings who had never known a galaxy without the Skorath threat. Elder Theron joined her at the viewport, his ethereal features reflecting the lights of the distant vessels. Captain, he said softly, whatever happens in the coming battle, you should know that you've already achieved something remarkable. You've shown the galaxy that courage is contagious. Chen nodded, thinking about the chain of events that had led them here. A single distress call, answered by a single ship, had grown into something that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Not through conquest or domination, but through the simple recognition that some things were worth fighting for. Tomorrow, they would face the Skorath Dominion in the largest space battle in galactic history. The outcome would determine whether the galaxy continued to live in fear, or finally learned to live in hope. But tonight, Chen stood surrounded by allies from across known space, and she knew that whatever happened, humanity had already won the only victory that truly mattered. They had proven that when someone called for help, there would always be someone brave enough to answer. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, and somewhere among them, the future of the galaxy waited to be written.